good afternoon, or good morning, or possibly good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Today, we're pleased to be showcasing Missouri Annie's project in our third showcase this year. My name is Doris Mold, and I am the co-CEO of Annie's project, and you'll hear from my colleague Karisha in just a few moments. But today we're talking about the hard but necessary conversation on farm succession. And this is part of our 20th anniversary celebration, our showcases. And if you'd like more information about other activities that are taking place, please take a look at our website or take a look at our social media channels for other updates on 20th anniversary celebrations. We'd like to thank Farm Credit for being a supporter of our 20th anniversary celebrations and Annie's project over the years. I'd also like to do a shout out to our founder, Ruth Hambleton. She had the vision to start Annie's project 20 years ago, and she started it based on influences and life experiences from her mom, the original Annie. And so Annie's project is dedicated to the work that Ruth started, associated with watching her mom grow up and be part of a, well, not grow up, but I guess grow up in a sense as an adult as being a farm manager, owner, and operator. And her mom had little or no experience in this area until she married a farmer, and then she became a farmer herself. And through her challenges and experiences, Ruth came up with the idea of Annie's project. Just wanted to run through. We do have several other showcases that are still coming up. So we're going to be taking a little break here over the summer. We will reconvene our showcases in September with Indiana, and their topic is to be announced. And then we have October, we'll have a session on agricultural law that will be presented by Maryland and Delaware Annies. And then also to be announced is the West Virginia's Annies program. We do have the cybersecurity and managing your financial risk and managing for margin squeeze posted. So you can see those recordings if you missed those, or if you'd like to watch them again. They are posted on our website, and they're also available on our YouTube channel if you're interested in watching those. And then also just wanted to make sure that people are aware we do have a new pilot program that we're working on with Risk Management Agency. If you have any interest or know somebody who might be interested in becoming a crop insurance agent or a loss adjuster, we are working on a pilot project with Risk Management Agency. And if you're interested in learning more about this, the meeting recording that we had in April is posted on our anniesproject.org website under resources. And just one last thing before I turn it over to Karisha is we'd like you to save the date. We are having our Annie's Project National Conference October 18th through the 20th in St. Louis, Missouri, and more information will be coming out on that soon. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karisha and welcome my co-CEO. And also she is one of the coordinators for Missouri's Annie's Project, along with Wesley Tucker, who are our guest speakers today. Welcome.
Thank you, Doris.
Doris, I think you have to stop sharing before it'll allow me to share. All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right. Wesley is going to pull up our presentation for today. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. So glad to have you join us. As Doris said, I'm Karisha Devlin, and I wear a couple of different hats. I am co-CEO with Doris, the National Annie's Project Foundation, and I also am an ag business specialist for MU Extension. And then I also am a farmer. My husband and I have a row crop operation here in Missouri, and really excited to be here today to show off some of the things that we're doing in Missouri. So to start off, I'm going to just go through a couple of slides of background information about the Annie's Project program in Missouri. So Wesley, yes, thank you for pulling up that next slide. So we kind of do things collaborative in Missouri. We have shared the co-program coordinator role. And when we first started Annie's Project in Missouri back in 2005, Mary Soba, a colleague of mine, and myself, we headed up Annie's project here in Missouri. And then a few years back, Mary had some other job responsibilities come up, and she decided to step back from the co-coordinator role. And I was very excited to have our colleague Wesley Tucker join me in that role. And he and I have been sharing that for several years now. But as I said, we first started Annie's project back in 2005 here in Missouri. And since that time, we've had 1,250 women go through our various Annie's project courses. And our delivery methods here in Missouri have been face-to-face. Back in 2021, we started virtual classes. So the last couple of years, we've been doing several virtual classes. And then we also have hybrid classes. We've kind of morphed into those now, where you can be face-to-face, but we also have a virtual component as well. And there's a lot of different Annie's project courses out there. The original 18-hour program that we call Annie's 101, we've taught a lot of those classes. We still teach the Annie's 101 classes. We've also taught Managing for Today and Tomorrow, which is focused on business, estate planning, succession planning. Know Your Numbers, Know Your Options, which is a financial risk program. And then we've had several Inspired by Annie's classes. Some of these classes have came about by questions that our participants have had, and maybe pertaining certain topics, or just a series that we've decided that we'd like to start. Some examples of some of the Inspired by Annie's courses include Women Marketing Grain and Livestock, Understanding Carbon Credits, Women Managing Equine, and then a Value Added series. One of the topics that has come up so many times, and we always have participants that have more questions about them, is estate and succession planning. And one of the things that we really try to emphasize is the difference between estate and succession planning. And I'm not going to get into that. Wesley will talk to us about that here in a little bit. But we do a lot of estate planning, succession planning courses here in Missouri. Some of that is tied into our Annie's project courses. And a lot of, as I said, a lot of the questions participants have want more information on kind of pertain to those areas. We're very fortunate in Missouri to have the expertise of Wesley Tucker. I'm going to brag on you for a few minutes, not a few minutes, I'll be really quick. Wesley, I know you're very modest, but Wesley is such a wealth of knowledge in this area. He has personal experience that he brings to the table, but also years of experience of working with farm families. Succession planning is hard, and there's a lot of decisions that have to be made, a lot of tough conversations that you have to have. And Wesley has been at the forefront and helped a lot of farm families in Missouri and in other states to work through these issues. Wesley is a really sought after speaker. He speaks at a lot of conferences around the country on succession planning. He just recently got back from Wyoming, a conference that he spoke at out there. Wesley also serves on the International Farm Transition Network Board of Directors. So we're really excited to bring you kind of a snippet of what we do in Missouri, and also be able to share some of Wesley's knowledge with you. So with that, Wesley, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Karisha, I tell you every time you do that to quit, because I'd much rather have people have low expectations and be pleasantly surprised than to go into it with high expectations and be disappointed. So, but thanks for the introduction. I am happy to be here. I'm excited about this. I think you guys will figure out pretty quickly. I'm very passionate about this. I think this is probably one of the biggest challenges we face in rural America in the coming years. And so, you know, regardless of what you call this, sometimes I call it navigating family dynamics. Sometimes I call it, you know, the difficult conversations, whether you call it farm succession planning, whatever you want to call it. You know, it's really about how we try to pass the farm on to the next generation and give it a chance to be successful. Karisha and I are from Missouri. I am from about as middle part of the country as I could be. I am right under that M in Missouri, so where I am located in the Ozarks. As a good parent, I always have to start a program with a picture of my family, because I'm a proud papa. So there's my wife and daughter on one of our horse trail rides. And again, I just do that because I like to. So you get to see my family. what I want you to do, if we were sitting in person, what I would tell you to do is I would tell you to take your right hand and reach up into the sky like you're sitting in your car and grab your seatbelt and pull it down and snap it in. Because I want you to have your seatbelts on, because we're going to go pretty fast and we're going to cover a lot of material. We are going to try to cover in the next 50 minutes. We're going to try to cover what I like to do in a 3-hour session. So as Karisha was saying, we've been doing A&Es in Missouri since 2005. I taught my first class in 2006. And the very first class, I scheduled an hour for estate and succession planning. And I quickly realized that estate and succession planning was probably the most popular topic. There was no way we could do it in an hour. The ladies always wanted to ask more questions. They wanted more information. And so eventually it morphed into, we used an entire 3-hour session on the topic. And so sometimes we had to add a 7th week to our A&E sessions to make it work, but because this was a very important topic. So again, I'm going to try to cover 3 hours worth of material at kind of the 30,000 foot level. But this is what I'm going to kind of touch on is just this idea of how we navigate family business dynamics, trying to separate those family from business roles. We're going to talk about some roadmaps to farm transition, how we get from one generation to the next. And you will hear me say repeatedly, you've got to have a map for it. You've got to have a roadmap for how we get there. We cannot leave this to chance. And then we're going to spend quite a bit of time at the end talking about intentional communication, that idea of how we use family business and family council meetings to help protect not only the business, but also the family. I am, as Karisha said, I am also a farmer, a rancher here in the Ozarks, but I've also went through this with my family. We are 9 years into our farm transition. My father passed away 9 years ago. And so we are still working through our transition. And that's the thing, these are not things that happen overnight. They take a long time to work through I've learned a lot of the things not to do and some of the things to do, not just from my educational background, but from some of the things that we've went through as well. I get a chance to talk to a lot of beginning producers, a lot of cattlemen's groups, different things like that, Farm Bureau meetings, things like that. And one of the questions I always start out at asking them is, how many of you, and you can go ahead and launch the poll if you'd like to, Doris, but how many of you is your goal is the day after the funeral, the trailers all come and load up the cattle, all of the combines and tractors are scheduled for the machinery auction to be sold, and I would like my kids to list the land with the realtor to be sold. Is that your goal for the day after the funeral? Yes or no? So please take just a couple of seconds.
Go ahead and end it.
Yeah.
Share the results.
You guys are an anomaly. 2 people actually clicked yes. That is the first time I have had that happen. This is wild. I would love to visit with those 2 people. And there is nothing wrong with that. I tell people all the time, there is nothing wrong if that is your goal, because if you truly have none of your kids that want to continue the operation, there is nothing wrong with saying, I've had a great run. I've enjoyed farming. Now we're going to go ahead and liquidate the assets. But what I find time and time again is that is not the goal of the farmers. And so I like to remind them that if that is not your goal, then you've got to get serious about this. You got to get serious about this and put a plan in place to make sure that that does not happen. All right. The reality is, we know this, right? We know that about 1/3 of the farmland is controlled by someone over the age of 65. About another 1/3 of it is someone 55 to 65. So the reality is 2/3 of our farmland is controlled by someone over the age of 55. And if we look at previous censuses of agriculture, every time we get a new census, the younger generation is controlling less and less, while the older generation is controlling more and more. They've kind of changed the way they ask this question on the census. So you'll notice that we don't have the 17 and 2022 data in there yet. But, if the question was asked the exact same way, there is no doubt that it would be even more extreme. So I don't care if you are a row crop producer, if you are a cattle producer, or to be honest with you, if you own the hardware store on rural Main Street. Rural America is on the edge of a massive amount of rollover in assets from one generation to the next. And again, I firmly believe this is probably the biggest challenge that we face in agriculture. I am a livestock economist. I am not a farm transition planner by trade. I kind of stumbled into this, the way you'll see here in a few minutes. But my background is, I teach feedlot management, I teach grazing schools, I teach budgeting and finance for producers, marketing. I give a lot of Outlook presentations. That is my background. That is who I am. But 11 years ago, because of my work with Annie's, I happened to be sitting in Memphis, Tennessee at the 2012 Women in Agriculture Education Educators National Conference. And Dr. Baker was teaching one of the concurrent sessions. Dr. Baker was the founder of the Iowa Beginning Farmers Center. And Dr. Baker showed this slide. And this slide, you ever have one of those moments that something just kind of clicks and you realize that's the difference, or that is what that means? When he showed this slide, it changed my career. It really did. Because when I was doing those estate planning classes with my Annie's groups, I was spending all my time on estate planning. I was talking about wills. I was talking about trust. I was talking about probates. I was talking about all that stuff that I would consider estate planning. But Dr. Baker made the point that if a farmer's goal is just passing your land to the kids, if you just want to pass the land to the kids, or even the cows and the machinery, if you just want to pass the stuff to your kids and let them do whatever they want to with it the day after your funeral, all you need is an estate plan that you pass your stuff to your kids. Boom, that's simple. But he made the point that if your goal is actually seeing your family business continue, then you got to have a succession plan. Because yes, you've got to think about the assets, and you got to think about, does the farm even generate enough money to bring another family in? Can I retire? What am I going to live on if I bring another generation into the operation? And then the $1 million question is, who's my business successor going to be? And are they even prepared to take over the operation? When he showed this, and Dr. Baker became a good mentor of mine, I realized that there really is a difference between estate and succession planning. And even a lot of the courses that I see offered, they say succession planning, they still go back and spend a lot of time on trust and probate and things like that are estate planning. And you have to realize that you need both. You need a succession plan and an estate plan. And especially they have to work together. So, I think the $1 million question comes up of, what do I do when I have 4 children and only one of them wants to take over the farm? I saw several questions were listed whenever people registered today, and a lot of the questions come back to that fact of, how do I balance equal versus fair? How do I balance that when I've got more than one child, but only one wants to farm? I will give you one piece of nugget of information. Remember, I'm an Ozark hillbilly, so I gotta kind of tone it down to a few nuggets. The first nugget I will give you is, if you want to make this process simple, once you have had your first child, stop. It becomes a lot easier if you stop after one, all right? But, it gets more complicated beyond that. But anyway, I saw this slide, became good friends with Dr. Baker, and really started getting into this about 11 years ago. That was in 2012. I saw that slide. Fast forward 1 year later, in 2013 is when my father passed away. As I said, it'll be 10 years this fall. So those things kind of happened at the same time that we started going through our farm transition. And my father died much earlier, much younger than we expected. So we didn't have a lot of things in place in our operation. And going through that process, I just again realized how vitally important this is for rural America. So my second poll question that I'll ask them to put up is, what do you feel is the hardest part of being in business with family members? You would think being in business with those that you love should be extremely easy. But what do you feel like is the hardest part of being in business with family? And you can choose 2. Is it the finances? Is it the whole hierarchy thing of who's the boss? Is it different goals and expectations between generations? Is it communicating between generations? Is it sibling rivalries? Or is it something else? So choose 1 or 2 of those if you don't care, and I'll be interested to see what you guys say is the toughest part of being in business with family. All right, we've got a pretty even keel. A few people said finances. A few people said the hierarchy thing, who's the boss, different goals and expectations, communicating, sibling rivalries. So that you got a little bit of all of them, right? You got to, and I would agree. I was sitting down when I created this poll yesterday trying to think about what some of the different things people list, because this is one of the questions I ask, of course, when I'm face to face and try to get a lot of interaction from the audience. And for those educators out there, I think one of the things we need to do when we're trying to do these virtual classes is figure out how we try to blend, our things that we're doing that we would do differently face to face with virtual. And I think polls is one of those things to help get some of that interaction. But, to me, a lot of those things that you just identified really come down to what I would call the clash of the two systems, right? It's the clash of the family system versus the business system. Just like we talked about who's the boss. All right, well, today, am I your son or am I your business partner? Are you my brother, my younger brother or my older brother, or are you my partner? Are you my employee or are you my nephew? All of those types of things, we have that friction and conflict between those family and business roles. And I'm not going to lie to you. Family businesses are hard. They are some of the most difficult businesses we have to run. The reality is, if I just have to look at you as an employee that I am not related to, or an equal partner that I am not related to, and not have to be confused by some of that family background that I have, they are much easier to deal with those relationships, okay? I wish I had the Staples Easy button for it. I don't. But what I'm going to hopefully give you in the next 38 minutes, I've got my timer set over here, so it's running beside me, is kind of a framework for how we can work through some of those issues. If we were face to face, I would ask you, what is the key to a great marriage? What's the key to a great successful marriage that can have, a 50-year anniversary? Well, the key to a good marriage is communication, right? It's intentional communication. But how many of us actually have a regular date night? You may tell me that communication is the key to a good marriage, but then we don't take time to have regular date night and actually make sure that we're communicating. Well, why don't we? Well, we don't because life gets in the way, right? There's always something to be done. There's always kids that need to be taken to ball practice. There's homework to be helped with. Well, it's the exact same thing on the farm. Intentional communication is literally the lifeblood for a family business to work through those family versus business issues. But unfortunately, there's always another field that needs to be planted or sprayed, or always another group of cattle that needs to be worked or vaccinated or weaned. There's always something that gets in the way. And so just like if we do not put date night on the schedule and say nothing is going to be allowed to bump that, it will not happen. It's the exact same thing for family businesses. Unless we say every 3 months, we're going to sit down as a family and we're going to go over the finances and we're going to talk about our goals and strategic planning and things like that. If we do not put that on the calendar and say nothing is allowed to bump that, it will not happen. So I call it intentional communication. We got to get extremely intentional about we're going to do it and we're not going to let anything bump it from the schedule. So let's think a little bit about how we prepare the next generation. All right. Typically, if you think about it on the farm, you start out as a grunt, right? As soon as you're able to reach a clutch on a tractor or carry a feed bucket, you're given chores to do. Now, when you become an adult and you enter the farming operation as an adult, hopefully you become an assistant manager, or what I still call grunt level 2, because the reality is you're given lots and lots of responsibility of production things to do and labor, but you're really never given management authority. Typically, dad or grandpa is still the one always calling the shots. Now, one day you get to become CEO of the family business. But what has to happen for you to transfer from grunt level 2 to be promoted to CEO? Well, the reality is what has to happen is someone's got to die. 9 times out of 10, we don't get to become CEO of the business until someone actually dies, right? Well, I mentioned earlier, I showed a picture of my family trail riding. Again, that's what my wife and daughter love to do. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy doing it as well. But so we try to plan one big vacation every summer while my daughter's on summer vacation. Well, when we decide where we're going to go, we have to figure out how to get there, right? So used to, we would pull out the 50-page atlas and go through the state maps. Now you can just plug it in your phones, and if it says, hey, I want to go to Pagosa Springs, Colorado from Buffalo, Missouri, it tells me how to get there. But I got to have a map, all right? That is essentially what a succession plan is. A succession plan says, here we are today. What are the steps we want to take for my son or daughter to eventually take over both management and ownership of the operation? All right. My second nugget I want to pass to you. The first one was stop after the first kid. The second one is, if you don't remember anything else I say, I want you to understand that succession planning is a process. Estate planning is an event. See, estate planning says, okay, here's my bucket of my stuff. All right, here's my land, here's my machinery, here's my livestock. They're all in my and my wife's bucket. And I'm going to keep everything in my bucket until the day I die, and the event of my death triggers my estate plan and my stuff goes to my heirs. All right, but it stays in my bucket till I'm gone. The succession plan says, okay, today in 2023, I have all of my stuff in my bucket, but a couple of years from now, I want my son or daughter managing and controlling a little bit of the operation. And a couple of years beyond that, I want them managing and controlling a little bit more. And a couple of years beyond it. And people always ask me, how long does this process need to be? You know, it varies. It varies from family to family. But I remember, and I'll give her credit for this. I remember Rena Striegel telling me one time, she said, the time frame is kind of like, has anyone ever been on a plane that had to land on a short runway? So, you know, you had a big plane, and for some reason you had to land on a really short runway. But when you landed on that really short runway, it was pretty rough because as soon as you hit the ground, the brakes were applied and you had to slam on the brakes to be able to barely stay in your seat to not go off the end of the runway. Well, the longer the runway we have, the smoother that landing can be. And so this is one of the things people ask me, how soon do you start planning this? Well, you can never start too early, right? You can never start planning this process out. But it really is a process for how we get from one generation to the next. Now, on my way back from Colorado here, I pulled over to let my truck cool off, because if you can see that yellow sign back there in the background, if I zoom in on that, that is telling me that I was about to go, I'd actually just come back through it, but telling me I'm about to enter Wolf Creek Pass. And if anyone's ever been through Wolf Creek Pass has this little hairpin curve that if I don't slow down, I go off the edge of the mountain, okay? Well, do I need a map for telling me that Wolf Creek Pass is coming up? Sure I do, right? I need to know that, so I need to slow down and be careful. Well, think about, if I am leaving everything in my bucket, if I am relying on estate planning to pass my operation from one generation to the next, what might be some curves around the corner that I'm not seeing yet that could totally disrail that plan? You know, people generally think of divorce, disability, financial issues, the nursing home. But what I get a chance to talk to young producers all the time at beginning farmer conferences, and I say, I don't want you relying on statements like this can all be yours someday. Son or daughter, come back to the operation and this can all be yours. I want you knowing you're building your own future. And I also think it's funny. I don't have a lot of time to tell stories, but I always think it's funny. The older generation is always worried about the younger generation getting a divorce. What if the older generation happens to get a divorce? Or ladies, do you know what the number one, in my opinion, one of the number one risk of your son or daughter not getting the farm could be? Is unfortunately, if you die first. We all know you women outlive us men. We don't take care of ourselves, right? So you women outlive us men by several years generally. Well, if your husband dies first, often the wife, depending on, not always, but often she stays a widow, all right? But what if you happen to die first? Reality is 99 times out of 100, your husband's going to remarry. That's just the way it is. We men can't take care of ourselves. We feel like we need someone to be there for us, right? And I have come to realize that the official mourning period, because you women outnumber us men by about 8 or 9 to 1 by that point in life, that the official mourning period is about 2 weeks. And after about 2 weeks, widow women will start bringing your husband casserole dishes, and they won't bring them in disposable containers. They will have to come back to pick them up, okay? So, what if I come back to the operation and I work 30 years in the operation and then my mom happens to go first and dad remarries? Well, who gets the farm then? Do I get it because I've spent 30 years in it, or do my new stepmom's kids get it? And again, these are all questions we've got to deal with, we've got to encounter. But as I said, when I talk to beginning producers, I say, whose future are you building? Are you building your future? And do you know you're building your future? Or are you investing in your future stepmom's future? Are you investing in your siblings' future that have no interest in the farm? I want you knowing what my efforts are directly leading to my future. And again, as I said, I don't have a lot of time. I'm hitting these really, really fast, kind of at the 30,000 foot level. But I always talk about 5 phases of succession planning. The first phase is you want the younger generation to leave before they're allowed to come back. That doesn't necessarily always mean college, but I want them to go elsewhere to get exposure to other ways of doing things before they're allowed to come back into the operation. When they do come back, I don't start them making them a partner immediately. I don't start share agreements. I start with a trial work period where I pay them a decent salary. But the point is, it's a short work period to basically see, can we navigate the family and business roles, or are we better off just staying family and having businesses separate on our own? Because honestly, being flesh and blood doesn't guarantee success. I've already told you, it makes it much, much more difficult to be successful. So at the end of a short period, maybe 1 year, maybe 6 months, we sit down and we say, yeah, I think we can take the next step to becoming business partners, or no, to protect our family relationships, let's just have our own separate businesses, okay? But that is a short period that has to end. If your son or daughter is a part of your operation for more than 5 years and they don't own any part of it, I feel like we are failing them, because I want them investing in their future and knowing that they're building their future. Now, the third phase is they begin the path to both management and ownership. And it has to be both. I want them managing some part of the business. One of the best examples of this I can give is one of my largest cattle producers tells the story about when he was just in high school. He said his dad said, hey, son, you see that empty pen over there? They were cattle feeders. And he said, you see that empty pen over there? I want you to go to the sale barn this weekend, and I want you to buy calves and fill that pen, and I want you to feed them out. I'm not going to tell you anything to do. I will be here and I will answer any question that you have. I will help you if you want it, but I am not going to micromanage you. I am not going to tell you what to do. And he said, I made some bad decisions in that first set, and it didn't work out the greatest, but he said, you know what? My dad let me learn from it. And when I encountered a problem, I could go ask him about it. Unfortunately, way too many times we micromanage our kids. We're afraid they won't do it the way we would do it. We're afraid they'll screw it up or something, and we just hold on to the reins way too tight. And I feel like we're not preparing the next generation when we do that. I also, as I've said earlier, I want them on the path to ownership. And I realize we got to get creative here, because the reality is farming doesn't generate a lot of cash, but we build wealth, right? Our land goes up in value. We accumulate more machinery, more livestock. So maybe we allow them to earn a percentage of something, but we have to get them on the pathway to ownership. I want you to remember the first automobile that you bought with your own money that was yours. And it might be like me. I'm standing in front of the rusted out fender of that truck in the picture, so you can't see it. But how did it feel differently that day that you were driving your automobile that you bought with your own money versus yesterday you were driving your parents' automobile? I know it did for me, and I think it does for everyone. So even when I teach human resource classes, it's no different. I tell people, if you want a motivated employee, you put them in charge of something where they will succeed or fail based on what their effort is. So put them in charge of some small aspect of it, and allow them that the harder they work, the more they earn, that they build their own future. It's the exact same difference in farm succession planning as it is in human resource motivating employees, okay? Exact same difference. Now, phase 4, if phase 3 was beginning management and ownership, phase 4 is advanced management and ownership. And it has to include the finances, the purchasing, the marketing, all of those things. It has to include the checkbook. Way too many times We do not open up the checkbook and truly talk about the financial implications of things until the day after we're gone. And then again, we can't help them. Have you involved your son or daughter in all of the negotiations with the landlords? I see that all the time. The older generation passes away, and now you've got a whole host of landlords that have no relationships with the younger generation. Now, the final phase is they become the majority manager and owner, and the older generation takes a step back. Now, some universities or guide sheets or whatever call this withdrawal. I do not call this withdrawal, and you'll see in a minute. I want the older generation continuing to be involved in the operation. I need them to continue being involved in the operation, but I need them changing their role slightly. And if we're doing a good job of this, hopefully by this point, there's another generation starting phase one. At the end of this, I'm going to give you the link to some of our resources here at Missouri, and I'll show you other resources from other universities. There's a ton of good ones out there. Many of you have much better guide sheets than we do. But last year we sat down and we created 3 new guide sheets, and one of them was on these 5 phases of management and ownership transition. What milestones do you expect before someone's allowed to transition to the next phase? During that phase, what production decisions am I going to be making as the senior operator? What decisions are the successor going to be made? Again, it's just an aspect to make you sit down and actually think about that and make that roadmap for how we're going to do. If we just rely on, well, it'll all work its way out, 9 times out of 10, it doesn't. So let's talk a little bit more about thinking about these family versus business roles. If you go back and look, if you want something to read about Tagari and Davis's 3 circles of the family business. Because before Tagari and Davis outlined that in 1978 at Harvard, there was only 2 circles, family and business. But they said, no, it's actually more than that. If you think about it, every business has owners, right? Whether it's you and your spouse's farm, or whether it's a mega corporation owned by 100,000 investors, someone owns the business, all right? And an owner is entitled to a return on their money. Every business has employees, someone that does the work of the business, right? And again, if it's you and your spouse's farm, these circles are exactly right on top of each other, right? You and your spouse own the business, you and your spouse do the operation of the business. But in some, they're completely separate. Walmart is owned by investors and then hires a bunch of employees to do it, right? So an employee that does the business is entitled to a fair compensation for their effort. But the difference is with those are pretty easy to understand and explain. But with the family business, you have to throw in the family circle, right? So we have family members that may or may not be in the ownership circle and may or may not be in the day-to-day operation of the business circle. And, what is a family member entitled to? Well, at the basic level, a family member is entitled to love and respect. I could spend 2 hours talking about these 3 circles because most families that I've worked with at some point see me sit down on a piece of paper and draw these 3 circles and talk about them, because most of our conflicts arise because we blur the lines of these 3 circles. And even though they may overlap to a great extent or to a little extent. If we can think about separating these 3 circles out and thinking about what I am entitled to in the circle that I am in and what my responsibility is in the circle I'm in, if I can think about those separately, go so far to avoiding many of the conflicts that we encounter on a daily basis. For instance, all right, you're my son. So, I ask you to come home on nights and weekends and help in the farming operation, but you don't get compensated for that. Well, I ask you to do that because you're a family member and because you may become an owner someday. But could you hire someone that's not related to you to say, hey, I want you to work 25 hours a week on nights and weekends for the next 20 years, but I'm not going to pay you anything? No, you couldn't do that, right? What about thinking about, well, okay, I've got 4 kids. I've got 4 kids in my family circle, but I got one of them in the business circle. Now, what do I do with the ownership circle, right? Coming up with this whole fair versus equal thing. What do I do with the ownership circle if only one of them's in the business circle? thinking about separating these circles and thinking about what someone's entitled to and what someone's responsibilities are in each of these can help us deal with a lot of these issues. Another example I love to talk about. So let's say mom and dad have two boys that are in the business. And so mom and dad and two boys are in the family circle. Dad passes away, all right? And mom goes ahead and continues the family business. So mom is the owner now, and the two boys are running the business. So mom and two boys are in the family circle. Mom is in the ownership circle. The two boys are in the business circle. What if you start having trouble with one of the boys in the business circle? And I remember Dick Whitman telling the story about a family he had to work with, that one of the boys became really difficult to work with, was disrespectful to his mom. And one day his mom sat down and gave him an actual performance evaluation. And she read it. She said, hey, these are 8 out of 10 things you do really well, but here's a couple that you need to improve on. And the boy he looked at it, he kind of smirked, he wadded up the piece of paper, threw it in the trash, went back out to farming, right? Eventually, Dick had to get called in because the situation got really bad. And when this story was shared to him, Dick asked the young man, said, if you had been working at the local co-op in town, spreading fertilizer or spraying or working at the bank, and you wadded up your performance evaluation and threw it in the trash, what would have happened? And he kind of laughed and he said, I'd have probably been fired. But he didn't really get it. But at that point, the light bulb started coming on for mom, because mom was treating her son like a son. She wasn't treating him like an employee. See, we get to blurring the lines. Mom and two boys are still in the family circle, but mom is the only one in the ownership circle, and the two boys are in the business circle. What is the son's responsibility in the business circle? Well, it's to treat his CEO of his business, his boss, with respect and do what she asks. And mom realized, hey, I am wearing my mom hat when I need to be wearing the CEO hat. And I swear, one of these days, I'm going to get a hat made with 3 different bills. One that says family member, one that says owner, one that says business. All right. So that I know which day I need to be wearing which hat, because I hope you're starting to see, at least, if I change my hat and say, okay, I've got to put on my owner's hat today, and I've got to think about my responsibilities as an owner is different than my responsibilities as a mom. And often, especially after one generation passes away, I see a lot of conflict here, in that the sons feel like they are the owners and the runners of the business, and they treat their mothers often with disrespect, when mom is still the owner of the business and you are still the employee until you buy into the operation, right? So again, just thinking about how we separate these circles, I think helps us deal with a lot of these conflicts. And I'm going too slow because I'm down to 18 minutes left here, so I'm going to have to speed it up a little bit. But because we blur the lines to a lot of those circles, I see a lot of conflicts that arise. Several questions came up in the registration here about this, so I'm going to ask Karisha to launch the poll. Should the on-farm heir have to buy out the off-farm siblings? So I'm assuming you've got 3 or 4 kids, maybe only 2, but only one of them wants to farm with you. Should the one that wants to farm have to buy out their brothers and sisters to hold the farm together? Yes or no? Let's see what you guys think. While you guys are doing that, I will tell you, this is the place where when we're doing this, when we have more time, this is the place where I stop. I break people up. I don't let spouses sit at the same table with one another. I don't let 2 generations sitting at the same table with one another. I make sure everyone is split up, and I put them at different tables, and we allow them to talk about this. When I first started doing this, people say, oh, no one's going to want to talk about this. And I find it is just the opposite. Families realize through this that they are not the only ones going through these difficult decisions, and they are not the only ones struggling with what to do. And they really benefit from discussing it with each other. So 60% of you said no, the farming generation should not have to buy out their siblings. 40% said yes. And that's pretty similar. I usually get a pretty equal split. All right. What is making this more and more difficult every day is land values, right? So this is Missouri land values. I could pull it from any state in the nation. It doesn't matter where you go. Land is getting more and more expensive, right? For us in Missouri, it went up 12.2% last year alone. one of my columns, I write a monthly column, and one of my columns I titled, "Could you afford to start over tomorrow?" Could you as a farmer go out and buy your land, your machinery, and your livestock at full market value and start over tomorrow? Most times we say no, right? That's why it's so hard for a beginning farmer to start, because farming is very, very capital intensive. Well, this is where we start talking about this intersection between estate and succession planning, right? Because the problem is farming really stinks as a cash generator, right? We don't generate much cash. Our return on equity is generally pretty low from cash. But what we do, that's kind of a bad statement, right? But what we do accomplish is wealth accumulation. We accumulate wealth because, as I said, our land goes up in value every year. We accumulate more machinery. But the problem is if I am one of 4 kids and I walk into the bank the day after the funeral and I say, I've just inherited 25% of the farm, so I've got 25% down, will you give me a loan to buy the other 75%? Probably it's not going to work because it won't generate enough cash to make the payments. Farming will not generate the land payments most times on its own without significant off-farm income somewhere to make the payments. So we have to think about this. I have 3 goals as a succession planner. Yes, the first one's simple, to transition the operation from one generation to the next. But I have to do that in a way, such as my goal number 2, that the next generation can actually be successful. And so if I couldn't start over tomorrow buying everything at full market value, can I require my son or daughter to buy everything at full market value the day after the funeral and be successful? But then the third one you got to remember is, how do I do this in a way that I protect family relationships, right? And so I go back to that first slide that I said Dr. Baker showed that changed so much for me, is just that idea of, is my goal leaving my stuff, my bucket of stuff, to my kids and letting them do whatever they want to with it, which may mean that it has to be broke up and sold off, or do I actually want to see my family business continue? And if I want to see my family business continue, I've got to get more creative about this. Now, whatever you do, do not walk out of here and say, Wesley Tucker just did a webinar and he said to screw all the off-farm kids. That is not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is, you have to put a plan in place prior to your death, or that may be the result if we don't. Do not say, well, my kids all get along, they will work it out after I'm gone. No, they won't. And that is, most people told me, all but 2 said they don't want to see the land listed with a realtor the day after the funeral. You know, if that is not your goal, then you've got to put a plan in place to make sure that that doesn't happen. And just a couple of weeks ago, I heard someone actually say it this way: is the farm a business asset or is it an inheritance asset? And that's an interesting way to think about it. You know, how do I think about inheritance versus business assets? And, you know, again, one of the guide sheets that we created deals with these 3 circles. And I actually have some questions in there that I'm a big one on sitting your kids down, having open discussions well in advance before anyone gets sick and people are emotional about things because they may be fearing that you're going to pass away. But having these discussions very early in life and saying, okay, we're all in the family circle. Now, who wants to be in the ownership circle and who wants to be in the business circle? But I also think it's interesting to think about what they're willing to do to be in those circles. One of the best examples of this I can give is I've got a very large family that's got multiple operations, and they basically say, hey, you are entitled to be in the family circle. We can't kick you out of the family circle, even if we wanted. You're entitled to be there. You're entitled to love and respect. But when you become an adult, you're given a choice to have a job in one of our family businesses. If you want to, we expect you to go away and get qualifications to come back to be a contributing member to our family business. But you have to, it's not an entitlement. You have to get qualifications to come back into the family business. They also say the ownership circle is not an entitlement. You have an opportunity, just like you have an opportunity to work in the business, you have an opportunity to become an owner, but you have to either contribute, invest financially in the family business, or you have to invest in the number of years of sweat equity. And I just think that's an interesting way of putting it. Again, as I said, if we separate the 3 circles and say, everyone's in the family circle, but who wants to be in the ownership circle and who wants to be in the day-to-day operation of the family business circle? And what are you willing to contribute to earn the right to be in those circles? Again, separating the circles out, I think, makes a lot of sense. Now, as I said, I'm not saying to screw the off-farm kids. There are tools in the toolbox, and a few of the questions on registration dealt some more with that, different types of business entity structures, trust, LLC, some things like that. I'll be glad to talk to anyone about that later. I don't have time to talk about that now, but the point is the older generation has a responsibility to put that plan in place prior to their death. Just think about how much more difficult it will be for your kids after you go through, whether it's a sudden death or whether it's a long-term illness that they have to watch you suffer. No one is in a good frame of mind right after the funeral. They always say, if you lose a spouse, don't make any major decisions for 6 months or a year after the funeral. Let's do this ahead of time while we can all sit down and talk about it. And I also think it makes a big difference if we explain to our kids why. I also tell the younger generation when I'm at those beginning farmer conferences, the sooner you do this, the better. Have these discussions with your parents and with your siblings sooner, because we may have a correction, and we could very easily have a correction in land values, but let's face it, land's just going to continue going up over time. And what I routinely see is maybe one of the parents dies and one of the sons or daughters takes over the operation. And at that point, the farm is worth $3,000 or $4,000 an acre. And that son or daughter continues to invest financially in the operation and spend the next 20 years managing it and taking care of it. Then the other spouse, usually the mom, finally passes away. And then at that point, that son or daughter is faced with the decision, now I get to buy out my siblings. And now instead of $3,000 or $4,000 an acre, it's $9,000 or $10,000 an acre. And so the sooner we have these discussions, the sooner we put this plan in place, actually, the easier it is for the next generation. All right. My father was actually pretty advanced in this and thought through this. I actually bought out my sister's inheritance well before either one of my parents passed away. But it was a thing that I was able to invest in the operation and give her financial money at a time that she needed it, when she needed money to help put her kids through college, rather than waiting until her kids were all out of school and she didn't really need the money for me to buy her out then. I'm going to have to skip through this because I'm running out of time, but I love having this discussion about why is it so hard for the older generation, particularly the man, to let go. I get to teach generational differences when I do human resources. And I know my grandfather, was one that went through the Great Depression in Pearl Harbor. So for my grandfather, it was very much, duty before pleasure. My dad was a baby boomer, had different sets of life experiences. And for him, his work was his life. Baby boomers have a really hard time retiring, even non-farmers, because their life is about their work. But I figured out real early on when I started doing this 11 years ago that there's a difference between men versus women. Women, by the time they're 65, are ready to get a RV and travel and spend more time with the grandkids. Men cannot give up the planter or the cows. That's just the way it does. Men can't give it up. Karisha mentioned I'm on the IFTN board. This is one of my fellow board of directors from Ireland. These next couple of slides are actually his. Dr. Conway has spent a lot of time researching what we call symbolic capital. Symbolic capital is really my sense of belonging in society. It's what my place is. It's who I am. And if you think about it, how does the average person that's taught school for 30 years or maybe worked for extension for 30 years, how do they view retirement? It's something to be looked forward to and excited about. But how does a farmer or a rancher view retirement? It's something to fear. What am I if I'm not a farmer? What can I do? And I will be honest, there is a difference between men versus women here. Women often have had the off-farm careers. Women also put a stronger importance on identifying as a mom. Not everyone, but for us men, most men identify by their career, not identify as a farmer or as a husband and father first. Mom often will identify as a mom and a farmer second. Men will identify as a farmer first, as a father second. And we got our priorities wrong, but that's the way it works out. So remember my transition plan from grunt to grunt level 2 to CEO. remember I said it's not withdrawal for that final phase. I am on a mission to help the older generation, and in particular men, understand that the most important transition they will ever make is from CEO to that of an advisor or mentor. That is the most important step they will ever take. Because I ask the older generation all the time, which do you value more, your success or seeing your kids be successful? Because the reality is, American culture tells us that life is a competition. Life is a game. It's a competition. And we are supposed to scratch and claw until the day we die. We recently had a land auction, and two farmers were fighting over the same parcel of land. One was 84 and one was 92. And you might ask why? But the reality is, I have actually seen farmers sabotage their kids so that they can continue to be successful themselves and win at the game. But you think about it, in 2022, we had the Olympics, right? In the Olympics, there are some individual competitions and there are some team competitions. And the reality is, for a family business, the key word there is family. It is plural. At some point, I have to realize that my role in the family business has to go from being the star quarterback, calling all the shots, to being that of an advisor or mentor for the next generation. And again, if I truly want to see my business continue, my legacy continue after I'm gone, I have to make that transition and help that younger generation. I joke, even Tom Brady had to decide to no longer be the star quarterback, okay? So again, as I said, we've kind of put together a guide sheet to help think through some of that and think about those expectations and what your roles are in that. At what point do I transition from being the CEO in the business circle to being more maybe in the ownership circle and helping be a board member or something like that for my farm, and not being the CEO of the operation? Now, again, I have went way too slow here, so I'm going to go through the last section, family meetings, just extremely quick. But, I'll ask Karisha to launch one of my last polls. Which relationships are the most challenging for you in your family business, do you feel like? That of the parent to the son and daughter, sibling to sibling, if you have more than one child in the family business with you, the in business to the out of business kids, the direct family members to the in-laws, or the family and employees? Which of those do you feel like are the most challenging relationships to deal with? This is another one of those that I stop and have them talk about. One time to do my 3-hour workshop, a cattleman's group gave me 4 hours to do it. So I put more discussion questions in there. And when I got to the end, I asked them, was it too much? Was it too much discussion? And they actually told me, no, we loved being able to interact and talk with other producers about these issues. So, again, I think sometimes as educators, think about it. That's the basis of Annie's, right? In Annie's project, they're supposed to learn a little bit from us as instructors, but they're supposed to learn a lot from one another as well. And so I think even in the estate and succession planning, we don't put enough discussion questions in there for them to learn from one another. So pretty well balanced, right? Number one thing was in business to the out of business heirs, and sibling to sibling. Those are pretty common. I see those all the time. Well, you remember I talked about having date night and intentional communication. So these family meetings are the lifeblood for a family business. And I talk about 3 types of family meetings: operating meetings, family business meetings, and family council meetings. And if I ask you if you had family business meetings, most farms would say, yeah, we get together every Monday morning and we talk about what fields need to be sprayed this week and what cattle need to be worked. Well, those are operating meetings, right? Those are the 5,000 foot level discussions. But if I can get families to move beyond that, and at least once a quarter or at least twice a year, sit down and actually have some strategic 30,000 foot level discussions. Ranching for Profit talks about that we spend all our time working in the business, that we never back up to 30,000 foot and work on the business. Unfortunately, often we only have these big family business meetings when there's explosive issues coming at us. Dad's just been diagnosed with cancer. What are we going to do? The farm next door is available for sale. Do we buy it or not? If I see my brother one more time, I'm going to get my deer rifle and kill him because I can't stand him anymore. It's only when those big issues are afoot. But if I can get families to doing a regular schedule of having these family business meetings on a regular a repeat occurrence, we can actually build a culture of group decision making, right? And again, I don't have time to talk about this, but it's really important to think about separating those three circles and treating these circles like they need to be. So do we have job descriptions for one another? Do we talk about compensation packages? Do we evaluate one another? Which, by the way, I encourage evaluating the younger generation. I also encourage the kids to evaluate the parents. How are you doing as my boss? How are you doing as my CEO? But most times I find that if we can separate those circles and do some of these professional management things that we do in town at our town job, we can avoid a lot of the conflicts. I remember years ago talking about a 4-H specialist that had an excellent fair book. Oh my gosh, they had so many rules in this fair book. I'm like, man, there'll never be any conflict because everything's spelled out in the rules. And he said, son, I hate to tell you, but every one of those rules came about by some conflict between parents at the county fair. And so if we can put these rules in place, talk about them and discuss them, you know, I often see we don't talk about compensation packages. So I fall into a situation where, because I'm single, I show up at 5 o'clock every morning to feed the cattle in the feedlot. My sister shows up after she puts her kids on the bus, and she leaves every day by 3 to go pick them up at school, and we get paid the same. You know, I work for the university, and I know exactly how many days of vacation and sick days I have that I'm allowed each year, but we don't ever talk about that with family, right? Because we love family. We're gonna support one another. Well, I constantly see issues where someone's got to feed the cattle, so I show up every day, but my brother, he and his wife take off for a month and go to Europe, you know, on a family vacation. Why is that? Why does he get to take vacations and I don't? Do we ever sit down and talk about those? And so the more we separate those roles and think about how I protect my business, it also protects my family. All right. I've got to slip through these because I'm out of time. Last family meeting I talk about is family council meetings. And these are for everybody. Someone mentioned in the registration, what is my role as an in-law? You know, I am a firm believer that in-laws are just as much a part of this as blood relatives. And I believe we need to sit down at least once a year and have a discussion about what's going on in the family business and how it impacts the family and what things in the family are impacting the business, right? We need to have these discussions. And we don't because we don't like conflict, right? We don't want to open the door to that conflict. But in the 11 years, I've been with Extension 22 years, I've been doing this work 11 years. In the 11 years I've been doing this, I can yet to ever look back at a situation and say, yeah, I'm glad we kept that a secret from the rest of the family. It just never helps. Again, I think it's the older generation's role to do this ahead of time while you are healthy, while everyone can have mature adult conversations about this, talk about this is my expectation. You know, I really don't want to just leave you guys a bundle of stuff that you can sell. I want to leave you a business that is going to continue. Who wants to be involved with that? And how do we do that? I've got one other guide sheet on those, how to do those family meetings. You know, if I can get you in a regular schedule of doing family business meetings, it will help with A, B, and E. If I can get you doing family council meetings, it will help with C and D. All right. So, you know, we've got guide sheets on each one of those. If you just go to, and this is recorded, but go to MU extension, muext.us Farm Succession Resources, you will find all of those. And again, we don't have a monopoly on that. I love Wisconsin stuff. I like Oklahoma stuff, Canada, you know, and I don't want to offend any other university. Everyone's got good stuff on this. There's a ton of good stuff out there. I won't ask you to launch the last poll because we're out of time. But I end every one of my presentations. Well, actually, if you don't care, launch the last poll because I do want to see. I ask every one of them to say, what am I going to do? What am I going to go home and do that will protect my business, that will also protect my family? Because they're not exclusive. They are the same thing. So did you learn anything today that you can go back that will help protect your business and your family? Yes or no? I hope you give me yes. I will put up my email and phone number as soon as we take the poll down, and I will be glad. Again, I love Annie's. I love Annie's. I will, if I can help you in any of your Annie's classes, you can see I'm pretty passionate about this. I always say I'm kind of that old point that in the old West, have gun will travel. I have topic and will travel, especially with the virtual thing. I love going to speak at beginning farmer conferences and Annie's classes. So I guess that's a shameless plug, but if I can help any of you in your Annie's classes, would be glad to.
All right. Well, Wesley, you've covered a lot of ground. I think what it's saying is that we need to have a part 2 of the Wesley Tucker and Farm Succession Planning show here. We have a tremendous job. Wonderful to hear from you. I don't know, Karisha, do you have any of the questions that you think didn't get answered that we might just spend a couple moments here before we close out?
I think Wesley covered a lot of them during his presentation. Some of the other questions, I think they kind of pertained more towards the estate planning side, Wesley, rather than succession. But I will kind of follow back up on the in-law question, because sometimes being an in-law, it's how to even ask those questions. So what advice would you give to somebody that wants to get the conversation started within their family, but is trying not to be that in-law?
Yeah, I love that question. Saw in there. I think that's one of the most difficult places to be, the in-law or outlaw, as often people are called. And it's such a sensitive area. So you have to remember you are the in-law. So the more you can communicate through your spouse, the better. Sometimes if you ask a lot of pointed questions, you'll be seen as, well, you're the in-law, you shouldn't be asking those. But one of the things I'm pretty blunt with families is, again, the in-laws are just as much a part of this operation, even if they don't own some of this stuff. And so, we often get into that, gets an intersection between the state and succession planning. Often the in-laws aren't allowed to be owners. It has to be a blood relative that becomes an owner of the operation, but you're still just as much a part of that. And often people say, well, I don't want the in-laws at the meetings. And I say, why would you do that? Because if you don't have the in-laws at the meetings, what's the in-law going to be doing while the meeting's going on? They're going to be sitting at home wondering what the heck's going on and what's being said. And what is going to happen to your son or daughter the moment they walk into the door? They are going to be pounced upon. What was said? Who said what? What do you mean she said that? So I would much rather have them in the room, hearing it firsthand, being part of the conversation, realizing their role is different. Their role is a little bit different. But I would much rather have them being part of the process. And so if you are the in-law struggling with how to have your input, first thing is make sure you and your spouse are on the same page. Have those discussions outside of the meetings to make sure that you and your spouse aren't contradictory when you get to those family meetings, and try to encourage your spouse to make those points as much as possible. But again, don't be afraid to speak up and talk. And if you have a good facilitator will help bring in everyone's ideas as well, not allowing anyone to dominate the discussion, whether they're blood relative or not, whether they're older sibling or not, and so everyone asks me, do I need a facilitator? Most families don't need a facilitator unless there's a ton of dysfunction, and sometimes you do. But it is a touchy area. And I wish I had the Staples Easy button. It's the most difficult for the in-laws. It's the most difficult for the in-laws to have input. But I think the more professional a family treats this, having the family business meetings, having the family council meetings that are seeking input from everybody, the easier it becomes. That's why it's intentional communication. Again, I love that term. I call it intentional communication. We've got to do it. It's the lifeblood for our family business.
Great. Thank you so much, Wesley and Karisha, for this wonderful session. And folks will be posting this online, so you can be watching the Annie's Project webpage, certainly website for this. And we appreciate this. I mean, I know that it's a help to Annie's facilitators out there, but also the producers that joined us today, the people that are actually involved in farming and ranching. You had some excellent points, Wesley, and I'm sure food for thought, good things to ruminate on, certainly. And maybe we'll feature you again this fall after people have had some time to think about what you talked about today. So
Thanks for
thanks
the
again.
opportunity. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you back here this fall.